Hello everyone, and welcome to the 117th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Elijah Price, or Mr. Glass, from the Unbreakable trilogy. A tortured soul harboring a genius intellect, Elijah Price presents us with both an intriguing possibility and a harrowing dilemma: the existence of superheroes and the potential ramifications of their existence in our world. And through his efforts to prove the former, we are given a man whose choices and experiences mold him into a supervillain straight out of one of his beloved comic books. We're going to talk about Elijah in just a moment. But before we begin, let's first talk about our sponsor for this video, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a food delivery service aimed at helping you not only save time in the kitchen and at the grocery store, but it does so in a healthy and affordable way. When you sign up for HelloFresh, you're given over 40 weekly recipes to choose from for all meal occasions, lifestyles, and preferences, as well as over 100 seasonal items. You can follow these recipes for an easy and delicious meal like soy glazed salmon or mushroom and chive risotto, or you can use their high-quality ingredients to spice up what you already have in your kitchen, giving you dozens of options to choose from to break up the culinary monotony we all get stuck in from time to time. I know HelloFresh helps me whenever I've let the clock run by a bit too long, and I love that their boxes are 25% cheaper than grocery shopping and up to 70% cheaper when compared to restaurant dining. Right now, you can try all the great things that HelloFresh has to offer by clicking my link down in the description, where you'll get 60% off plus free shipping. Or if you prefer, you can go to HelloFresh.com and enter the code POGVILEMAR60. Thank you, HelloFresh, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's explore the tragic world of Mr. Glass. Elijah was born in 1961 at a department store to a crowd of onlookers. When a doctor arrived to examine this newborn, he was mortified to find that both his arms and legs had been either broken in the womb or as he was being delivered into the world in one way or another. After being taken to the hospital, Elijah was diagnosed with the rare disorder, osteogenesis imperfecta, or brittle bone disease. Though this is obviously unfortunate, Elijah was fortunate enough to be diagnosed with the least severe type of this disorder, type 1. And though he and those around him would have to be quite cautious with his person, as even something as simple as running into a door jamb or a playful shove could cause Elijah to experience an agonizing fracture to his limbs. Perhaps more perilous than the disorder itself was the psychological effect it had on Elijah, as when we're taken through a flashback set 13 years after his birth, we're shown a sullen Elijah sulking in front of a powered-off television with a sling around his arm. The physical injury the result of play or bullying, and the emotional trauma brought on by his feelings of helplessness, and the way his fellow students treated him at school. That is to say, like a freak, one that they lovingly dubbed Mr. Glass. Thanks to the loving care of his mother, however, Elijah was able to break through his fear and depression and live a relatively normal life, and he was aided in doing so by developing a hobby: comic books, becoming so engrossed in them, fully committing himself to the total study of this art form. Now, apart from inheriting a genetic disease, Elijah was given another gift: incredible and perhaps unmatched intelligence. And as a result, even though much of his time would be spent with the comic books he loved so much, Elijah was a natural at nearly everything he put his mind to: science, mathematics, engineering, finance, you name it, and Elijah could master it in record time. Because of this talent, when we first encounter Elijah at his gallery limited edition in Unbreakable, we encounter a highly successful man, one who has managed to create a vast amount of wealth for himself, wealth that allows him to operate such a refined establishment, and within we find it replete with not just valuable comic-based art, but what appears to be either high-class replicas of ancient artifacts, or the artifacts themselves. Amongst all these valuables, we find a man sharply dressed in expensive and uniquely tailored clothing, often with his signature purple accents, and his overall personality is cool, confident, quietly charismatic, calm, and perhaps a tad bit pretentious, though Elijah is more than willing to assert himself whenever necessary, and he could never be characterized as a pushover. However, all this success wasn't pursued simply for the sake of success. Elijah had a goal in mind, one that undoubtedly kept him highly motivated: the testing of a theory he had developed as a result of his interest in comics and his unfortunate position in the world. That theory being that comic books are the legacy of a storytelling tradition that goes back centuries. Stories that tell the tale of superhuman individuals watching over societies all across the world and serving as their protectors. People who could endure the harshest of conditions, attempt and overcome feats of Herculean strength, and provide solutions to any problem their fellow man might face by utilizing their superior intellect. And these stories, much like everything else in our world, were corrupted into the cartoonish variants we can find in neat little boxes between the white lines of comic books and in newspapers, a for-profit business model of comparatively ridiculous and heavily warped fantasy derived from tales of actual superhuman feats that were accomplished by the few gifted individuals among us. This is quite the unique and intriguing theory, and it's one that certainly deserved to be tested. However, with this line of thinking, an unfortunate problem presented itself. Elijah was aware that he was likely one of these extraordinary individuals, a man with a level of intellect far beyond even the most revered geniuses in the world, and that designation alone should have been enough to propel Elijah to the status of real-life superhero. But as Elijah delved more into his hypothesis and examined the particulars of his life, he found that he was a weak man who was dealt a cruel hand, a man that had always questioned whether he had a place in the world in the face of all the tragedy that had been laid in his lap. And because of this, he found that he had far more in common with supervillains than he did with superheroes. But he also correctly assumed that if there was a man like him on the spectrum of supers, there had to be others at the opposite end, people of unimaginable strength and vigor, and more importantly, people who led relatively normal lives who were unaware of their power. So, while his theory did rely on finding individuals with extreme physical or mental prowess, it more so relied on grouping those individuals in two distinct subsets: those with these powers who have lived average lives, and those who have been forced to endure some sort of trauma. Designations that would then allow Elijah to determine whether an individual would turn out to be a superhero or a supervillain. With his identity firmly entrenched in the latter, Elijah formulated quite the goal for himself. Because there was no way that Elijah would be able to detect these individuals by any known process, such as interviews, interrogation, espionage, or any other type of investigation due to the overwhelming amount of people in the world, he surmised that in order to find the heroes that the world needed, he would need to do so through villainy, to become the darkness, seeking the light. So with that abysmal idea now festering in his mind, Elijah tested his theory by committing unsurvivable atrocities to see whether or not anyone survived them unharmed. And if they did, he would know that his theory was correct. Now this method of experimentation is pretty insane, as even if these extraordinary individuals exist, the odds of one of them being caught in one of these disasters has to be incredibly slim, because the percentage of the population that has these traits has to be marginal at best. So randomly killing hundreds of people in the hopes that you'll find one person who fits this criteria is again insane, and it just goes to show that though Elijah has definitely been humbled in some ways due to the trauma he's experienced, he has also developed a massive ego as a result of his genius level intelligence, and it's his hubris that causes him to think that a plot like this could be anywhere close to being a necessary sacrifice to prove that people like him and David do exist. However, it was never really about just proving a theory. It was about Elijah's desire to find a purpose in life, as according to Elijah, the scariest thing in the world is to not know your place in the world, to not know why you're here. And I agree, that is an awful feeling to have. Except, as far as Elijah is concerned, he had possibly more opportunity to find his place in the world than most of us will ever have. Yes, he has a horrid condition that ensures that his life will be miserable if he doesn't exercise caution in even the smallest physical actions. But as we can plainly see in this film, he's still able to function well enough in society despite his limitations. Therefore, it stands to reason that a man like Elijah, who has an astronomical intellect, could do anything that he put his mind to. Yeah, of course he was never going to be a star wrestler or the next heavyweight champion, but with his natural talents, he could have been anything from a data analyst to a rocket scientist, and I bet you anything he could have found ample purpose in any of the infinite possibilities that were available to him. But again, the problem Elijah faces in finding his purpose is found in his ego. As though it's never stated by Elijah himself, he is clearly not content with being an ordinary person. He needs to be someone of note, a giant among men, whose place in this world cannot be questioned by those he deems to be lesser than he. We can partially attribute this mindset to his aforementioned theory regarding superhuman beings, as if you have a hunch that there are superhumans in the world, and that you're one of them, then you're probably going to develop quite the ego. But to develop an idea like that in the first place, you'd have to be delusional and a narcissist, as no person with humility who is grounded in reality would ever come to such a fantastical conclusion about themselves, let alone decide to murder hundreds of innocent people to prove their theory. And because Elijah was likely given affirmation that he was indeed a genius, and he was traumatized by his condition, and isolated because of it with nothing to keep him company except comic books, it's easy to see how he did indeed develop into one such delusional narcissist. Except, in this case, we can't exactly claim that he's delusional because of his unrealistic theory, as he does end up proving it. If he lived in our version of the world, then he would be, but he doesn't. And the proof he's given that superhumans do exist at the end of Unbreakable gave Elijah not just a heavy dose of elation knowing that he'd found his place in the world, but solace in the fact that he wasn't crazy, as there is a point in the film where Elijah almost gives in to despair when David almost turns out to be a dud. Even so, he is still a narcissist, one that's perfectly fine with killing scores of people so long as he can achieve what he wants to achieve. To be fair, Elijah does display a tad more altruism in the final film in this trilogy, as he does make a great effort to reveal to the world the existence of superhumans so they can be integrated into society, rather than executed by some cult. But even so, the lasting impact of Elijah's nefarious actions are made very apparent to us with the existence of the Beast, the man who developed DID to cope with the unspeakable abuse he experienced at the hands of his mother. And we'll never know whether or not his father would have been able to rectify this unfortunate situation, because he wasn't even given the option to do so, because he was murdered when Elijah blew up East Rail 177. This is a great example of how killing one person has an effect on everyone around them, as it's not just the deceased who are the victims of Elijah's terrorist activities, but their loved ones as well. In the end, Elijah outsmarts his captors and reveals himself and his creations to the entire world. But we have to ask ourselves, at what cost did he do so? Well, there's the hundreds of lives that ended so he could get to this point, yes, but we have to consider the aftermath of his actions as well. Because Elijah has revealed the existence of superhumans to the world, he's forced everyone to accept them, and so they have begun the process of integrating them into our society. But now that he's done so, he's opened the door for individuals who have these powers with malicious intent to begin inflicting great harm upon the world. Because of his actions, there will be hundreds, if not thousands of overseers popping up, but who knows how many hordes, and Mr. Glasses, will reveal themselves too. So that begs the question, what should we do if we were ever faced with such a dilemma? How do we make sure that as little innocent people as possible are affected by the actions of superhuman beings? To minimize the damage earthquakes cause, we have building codes. If you don't want your house to be swallowed up by a potential volcanic eruption, you don't build a house on the slopes of a volcano. But how can we protect ourselves against supervillains? Well, I don't think killing every superhuman who pops up is anywhere close to being right, but I honestly have no idea. If you do, let me know down below. But I will tell you this, I certainly wouldn't want to live in a world where superhumans existed if I had the option, because that would be beyond terrifying. Yeah, it's fun to imagine yourself with superpowers, but it's not so fun to imagine yourself living in a world with superpowers and you don't have them, because that just adds one more disaster waiting to happen to a world that's already filled with them, and all of us would have a much higher chance of being a victim of some cataclysmic battle or sinister plot than we would of being one of these few gifted individuals lucky enough to stop or cause them. But I digress. This is the world that Elijah Price created with his crimes, and those are inexcusable, but it remains to be seen whether or not such a world is one of increased misery or increased prosperity. But now it's time to ask ourselves, who was Elijah Price, the notorious Mr. Glass? He was a child who was born with a horrific condition that would cause him an untold amount of suffering over the course of his life. Ridiculed and bullied because of it, Elijah would grow in a world of pain and isolation. His only solace found within the comic books his mother lovingly provided for him. Unbeknownst to her, or anyone else, this would be the catalyst for Elijah to develop into an egotistical mass murderer who was fueled by tragedy. A man ready to sacrifice hundreds in the name of proving himself and others in the world to be extraordinary people who needed to protect society and deserved to be propped up to their rightful place. Elijah may have been both gifted and unfortunate, but none of that excuses anything he did. And though he's given the world a lot to consider about the nature of humanity and our treatment from those who are different from us, we can't excuse the way he did it. And he's a man who unfortunately got crushed in the unforgiving grasp of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Elijah? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.